Snow drifted like quiet ash through the treetops as Mila pressed deeper into the woods, her breath blooming pale clouds into the frozen air. Her threadbare cloak clung to her shoulders, barely holding back the cold, but she didn't turn back. The storm would worsen by nightfall. The cabin needed firewood, and she refused to let winter win again. She tightened her grip on the axe, a favorite of her late father. The thought of him made her throat tighten, but she breathed through it. He's gone. The cold and hunger took him. Now she's got to survive alone. And she will. Her feet knew this part of the forest better than any path in the pack she'd been chased from. Exile had a way of sharpening memory and hiding places. A branch cracked somewhere to her left. Mila froze. Her wolf stirred inside her, ears pricking, sensing something that wasn't danger. Yet, then she saw him, a tiny black wolf pup stumbling through the snow, his paws clumsy, his breaths fast and uneven. He chased after a squirrel with the determined wobble of a pup who had no idea he was alone in a world full of teeth. Mila's heartbeat softened instantly. "Oh, Moon," she murmured under her breath. He should have been with a pack, with a mother, with someone. She knelt slowly. The pup spun around and snarled. A tiny, trembling sound that came more from fear than fury. His fur bristled as he tried to look bigger, braver. "It's all right," Mila whispered softly. "I'm not going to hurt you." She didn't move, just waited. The pup stared at her, his dark nose twitching as he sniffed the air. He must have decided she smelled safe, or maybe he was just too young and lost to know any better, because the growling stopped. He took a wobbly step forward, then another, until he was close enough to sniff her outstretched fingers. A tiny pink tongue darted out and gave her hand a quick, wet lick. A smile broke across Mila's face, but the smile vanished a second later. From deeper in the woods came a different sound. Not a happy yip or a playful growl. This was a deep, hungry snarl, followed by another. Rogues, wild, lone wolves with no pack, no rules, and empty bellies. They would see this little pup as an easy meal. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through Mila. There was no time to run back to the cabin as a human. She had to be faster. She scooped up the startled pup and darted behind a large pine tree. She focused her mind, calling forward the change she had hidden for so long. There was a warm, shifting feeling, a quiet pop of bones, and where Mila had stood was now a sleek, warm, gray wolf. The little black pup looked up at her, his eyes wide, but he didn't seem afraid. Another rogue snarl, closer this time. Mila, the gray wolf, acted fast. She bent down and gently, so gently, picked up the pup by the scruff of his neck, just like a mother wolf would. Then she ran. Her powerful wolf legs carried them through the forest, leaping over fallen logs and dodging between trees. She didn't stop until the familiar, safe sight of her hidden wooden cabin came into view. She pushed the door open with her nose, stumbled inside, and shifted back into her human form, breathing heavily. She quickly locked the door and turned to the little black pup, who was now shaking on her rug. "You're safe now," she panted, kneeling and pulling him into her arms. "You're safe with me." For the next 2 weeks, the little cabin was no longer a lonely place. It was filled with the pitter-patter of tiny paws and the happy yips of a playing pup. Mila named him Shadow for his dark fur, and he followed her everywhere. She fed him good, rich meat from her hunts, shared her bed with him, and even talked to him as she cooked, the sound of her own voice a strange comfort. One morning, she woke up to a surprising sight. Curled up asleep in the little nest of blankets she'd made for him was not a wolf pup, but a little human boy. He had a mop of dark hair and sleepy eyes. He couldn't have been more than 3 years old. He looked up at her and wobbled to his feet, pointing a chubby finger at himself. Kale, he said, his voice small and unsure. Tears sprung to Mila's eyes. Her heart, which had been so lonely for so long, swelled with a love she had never known. This little boy, Kale, was the son she had never had. She quickly found some of her old childhood clothes, which her father had kept, and dressed him. She cooked with him sitting on the counter. She put him to bed with soft songs, and she took him with her to gather firewood, his small hand held tightly in hers. But as the days passed, she started to notice things. The way his eyes sometimes held a strange, old wisdom. The way the few forest animals they encountered would sometimes bow their heads as if in respect. She found herself wondering who his parents were. He was clearly special, the pup of a very high-ranking wolf, maybe even from the pack that had cast her out. One afternoon, during their second week together, they had just finished a breakfast of warm porridge. Kyle was playing with a little doll she had made him from sticks and string. Suddenly, he froze, his head cocked to the side, listening to something she couldn't hear. Then, he let out a long, happy howl and ran to the door, scratching at it desperately. "Kyle, what is it, sweetheart?" Mila asked, putting down her knitting and going to him. He just whined and scratched harder, his little tail wagging so fast it was a blur. Worried, but trusting him, Mila unlocked and opened the door. Her blood ran cold. Standing in a wide, silent circle around her small cabin were wolves. Dozens of them. 50, maybe more. They were massive, powerful, and their eyes were all fixed intently on her. They didn't growl, but their silence was more terrifying than any sound. Her first instinct was to protect Kyle. She tried to grab him, to pull him back inside and barricade the door. But the little boy was too fast. He darted out between her legs, his little feet pattering on the wooden porch, and ran straight toward the circle of wolves, his happy giggles ringing in the cold air. The wall of wolves parted for him. He ran directly to the largest wolf there, a massive beast with fur as dark as midnight, who had been hidden in the middle of the group. This great wolf's eyes were not like the others. They were as dark and deep as a bottomless pit, and they were staring right at Mila with an intensity that made her want to hide. Kale, completely unafraid, rubbed his small body against the giant wolf's leg like a happy kitten. Mila's hands were shaking. She forced herself to speak, her voice trembling. "I found him lost in the woods. There were rogues. I just saved him. I took care of him. I didn't know." The large midnight wolf stared at her for a moment longer, then turned and trotted calmly to stand behind a large pine tree out of sight. As he moved away, a smaller, powerful brown wolf stepped forward. Kale immediately ran to this new wolf, who bent her head and nuzzled him all over, licking his face with frantic, loving relief. A sad thought crossed Mila's mind. That must be his mother. She felt a sharp pang, knowing her time with the little boy she had come to love as her own was over. She stood on her porch, alone, surrounded by the silent, watching pack, waiting for what would happen next. For a long, terrifying moment, nobody moved. The only sound was Kale's happy babbling as the brown wolf, his aunt, though Mila didn't know it, covered him in affectionate licks. The circle of 50 wolves stared, unblinking, at the woman on the porch. Mila felt frozen, a mouse caught in the gaze of countless hawks. Her heart hammered against her ribs, so loud she was sure they could hear it. Then, from behind the large pine tree, the midnight black wolf emerged. But he was no longer a wolf. A man stepped forward. He was tall and broad-shouldered, seeming to block out the sun. He wore simple dark pants and a tight-fitting shirt that did nothing to hide the powerful muscles beneath. His hair was as black as his wolf's fur, and his eyes, they were the same dark, pitiless pools she had seen moments before. This was the Alpha. The power rolled off him in waves, a silent pressure that made the air feel thick and hard to breathe. Mila's own breath hitched. She knew him, not personally, but she knew who he was. Ronan, the son of the Alpha who had exiled her and her father. The most feared leader in all the surrounding territories. The stories of his temper, his coldness, his strength came rushing back to her. His gaze swept over her, from her worn boots to her frightened face, and it felt like being stripped bare. There was no gratitude in his eyes, only a cold, hard assessment. "You," he said. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. It was not a question. It was an accusation. He knew who she was, too. The daughter of the exiled traitor. Kale, sensing his father, toddled over and wrapped his small arms around the Alpha's leg. Ronan's hand, which had been clenched at his side, relaxed slightly. He placed it almost gently on his son's head, but his eyes never left Mila. "He was lost," Mila repeated, her voice stronger now, fueled by a mix of fear and a desperate need to defend herself. "I found him 2 weeks ago, chasing a squirrel. The rogues were coming. I brought him here. I kept him safe. I didn't know who he was." The brown wolf shifted then. In her place stood a fierce, beautiful woman with worried eyes. She scooped Kale into her arms, holding him close. "He's unharmed, Ronan," she said, her voice softer, trying to pour oil on troubled waters. "He looks healthy, well-fed." Ronan ignored her. He took a step closer to the porch, and the entire circle of wolves tensed. Mila fought the urge to step back, to retreat into the safety of her cabin. She stood her ground. "You took the Alpha heir into your hovel," Ronan said, his lip curling slightly as he glanced at her small cabin. "You hid him from his pack for 2 weeks." "I was protecting him," Mila insisted, her hands curling into fists at her sides. "What was I supposed to do? Bring him to the edge of your territory and leave him? I didn't know if the rogues were still out there. I didn't know if anyone was even looking for him." She saw a flicker of something in his dark eyes, not anger, but a sharp, painful acknowledgement. They had been looking for him, desperately. Kale, now turned and comfortable in his aunt's arms, pointed a chubby finger at Mila. "Mia," he declared happily. "Mia pue, Mia food." The simple, loving words from the child hung in the air, a stark contrast to the tension between the adults. It was the truth, spoken in the purest form. Ronan's jaw tightened. He looked from his son's happy, trusting face back to Mila's defiant one. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. He was weighing her story, her father's past, against the clear evidence that his son was not only safe, but had been loved. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, unforgiving decree. "You will come with us to the pack grounds," he commanded. It was not an invitation. The brown-haired woman, his sister Yara, looked at him with surprise. "Ronan, she is exiled. The law—" "The law does not account for this," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. He turned his pit-dark eyes back to Mila. "You will answer for your father's crime, and you will answer for keeping my son from me. Your fate will be decided by the Pack Council." Mila's blood ran cold, going back to the pack that hated her, facing a council that had already condemned her family. It was a death sentence, but as she looked at the wall of wolves, at the unyielding face of the alpha, and the little boy who was now waving at her from his aunt's arms, she knew she had no choice. To refuse was to die here and now. She gave a single, stiff nod. Her life in the peaceful, lonely cabin was over. She was going back to the world that had thrown her out, a prisoner of the very pup she had saved. The walk back to the Packlands was a silent, solemn procession. Mila walked in the center, surrounded by the shifting furry forms of the warrior wolves. Their warmth and scent of pine, power, and pack was overwhelming. It was a smell she had spent years trying to forget. Ronan, back in his massive midnight wolf form, led the way, a living shadow cutting a path through the forest. His sister, Yara, walked just behind him, carrying a now sleeping Kale in her human arms, glancing back at Mila every so often with an unreadable expression. Mila kept her eyes fixed on the ground, her mind racing. The Pack Council, the very same elders who had stood by and allowed her father to be cast out based on lies and rumors. They would never listen to her. Her father's last words echoed in her memory. "They need a villain, Mila, and we were the easiest target." The trees began to thin, and the familiar scent of the Pack territory grew stronger. Wood smoke, baking bread, and the distinct smell of many wolves living together. They emerged from the tree line onto a large, open green that sloped down towards a bustling village of sturdy log cabins. In the distance, a large, impressive lodge stood on a hill, the Alpha's home. As they entered the village, the world seemed to freeze. Wolves and people alike stopped what they were doing. A woman dropped a basket of laundry. A blacksmith halted his hammer mid-strike. All eyes turned to the procession, and more specifically, to the lone woman in the worn dress walking among their finest warriors. Whispers began to ripple through the crowd, sharp and pointed like thorns. "Is that the traitor's daughter? She has the boy. Did she kidnap the Alpha heir? Why is she back? She should be driven out." The hatred in their stares was a physical force, pushing against her. Mila wrapped her arms around herself, feeling smaller and more exposed than she ever had in the lonely woods. This was worse than she had imagined. They stopped in the center of the village, in the wide, empty space before the Alpha's lodge. Ronan shifted back to his human form with a seamless, powerful grace that commanded absolute attention. He took Kyle from his sister's arms, the sleeping boy looking tiny against his broad chest. The sight of the fearsome Alpha holding his son so carefully was so strangely tender that some of the crowd's murmuring quieted. An older man with a stern face and a warrior's build stepped forward. He was Beta, the Alpha's second in command. He looked at Mila with pure contempt. "Ronan," the Beta said, his voice booming across the square. "Why have you brought this exile, this daughter of a coward, back to our lands? Has she committed another crime against the Pack?" Ronan's dark eyes swept over his people before landing on the Beta. "She was found with my son." A collective gasp went up from the crowd. The accusation hung in the air, dark and damning. "See?" the Beta declared, turning to the Pack. "She sought to steal our future Alpha, just as her father sought to undermine our past." "No!" The word burst from Mila's lips before she could stop it. All eyes snapped to her. Her face was pale, but her voice, though trembling, was clear. I did not steal him. I saved him. He was alone and lost. I brought him into my home. I fed him. I protected him. I did not know who he was. Yara, who had been quietly observing, stepped forward. The child is healthy and unharmed, Beta. He does not fear her. In fact, he seems quite attached. She gestured to Kale, who had stirred and was now sleepily rubbing his eyes, his head nestled on his father's shoulder. The Beta scowled, unconvinced. A clever trick, to lower our guard. Ronan had been silent, his intense gaze fixed on Mila throughout this exchange. He saw the fear in her eyes, but also the defiant truth. He heard the way his son had called her name with affection. He remembered the isolated poverty of her cabin, a far cry from the comfortable life of a schemer. Just then, Kale fully woke up. He blinked, looking around at the crowd, then his eyes found Mila. A bright smile lit up his face. "Mia!" he chirped, reaching his little arms out towards her. The entire pack fell utterly silent. The child's unconditional love was a truth no accusation could overshadow. Ronan's jaw tightened. He adjusted his grip on his son, ignoring the outstretched arms. His voice, when he spoke, was low, but it carried absolute authority, cutting through the tension. "The council will meet at sundown to decide her fate," he announced. "Until then, she is my prisoner. She will be held under guard in the guest quarters." He turned his head slightly, his eyes locking with Mila's. "Not the dungeons." The Beta looked shocked. "Ronan, that is not our way for exiles." "It is my way today," Ronan said, his tone leaving no room for argument. He finally looked away from Mila and addressed the crowd. "The pup is home. That is what matters. Return to your duties." The command was clear. Slowly, reluctantly, the crowd began to disperse, though suspicious glances were still thrown Mila's way. A young warrior stepped forward at Ronan's silent signal and gestured for Mila to follow him. As she was led away from the square towards a small, secluded cabin near the main lodge, she dared one last look back. Ronan was still standing there, his son in his arms, watching her go. His expression was as dark and unreadable as the forest at midnight. But as Mila was ushered into the simple, clean room that would be her gilded cage, one thought echoed in her mind. He hadn't thrown her to the wolves. He had given her a chance. And for now, in a den of enemies, that one small act from the most feared alpha of all felt like a lifeline. The guest quarters were a small, sturdy cabin nestled in the shadow of the alpha's lodge. It was simple, with a bed, a wash basin, and a single window that looked out onto a secluded grove of aspens. To anyone else, it might have seemed peaceful. To Mila, the lock clicking shut on the outside felt louder than any slam of a dungeon door. She was a prisoner, dressed in the illusion of courtesy. The first day passed in a blur of silence and fear. A young, stern-faced she-wolf brought her meals, hearty stew and fresh bread, far better than what she usually ate, but never spoke a word. Mila could feel the judgment in her silence. She was the traitor's daughter, the exile who had dared touch their alpha heir. Through her window, she watched the life of the pack unfold, the sounds of children playing, the smell of communal cooking, the sight of warriors training together. It was a world of belonging, a world that had been ripped from her as a child, a deep, aching loneliness. One even the solitude of the deep woods had never carved so sharply, settled in her bones. On the second day, as dusk began to paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, she heard voices outside her window. Peering through the glass, she saw him. Alpha Ronan was walking through the grove, his large hand holding Kale's tiny one. The little boy was chattering away, pointing at butterflies and fallen leaves. Ronan walked slowly, matching his son's small steps, his usual terrifying presence softened by the evening light. He didn't smile, but he listened, his dark head tilted down toward the child. Then, Cale stumbled over a root. In a flash, Ronan's free arm shot out, catching the boy before he could hit the ground. He scooped Cale up, not with a sigh of annoyance, but with a swift, natural protectiveness. He brushed the dirt from Cale's knees, his movements surprisingly gentle for such a large, calloused hand. Mila's breath caught in her throat. This was not the cold, unforgiving alpha who had condemned her. This was a father, a tired, grieving father, carrying the weight of a pack on one shoulder and his motherless son on the other. In that moment, he didn't seem like a monster. He seemed human. As if he felt her gaze, Ronan's head snapped up. His eyes, dark and sharp, locked directly with hers through the window. Mila flinched, stepping back into the shadows of the room, her heart hammering. She expected anger, a reprimand for watching him. But none came. When she dared to look again, he was still standing there, Kyle perched on his hip. He wasn't scowling. He was just looking. His expression was unreadable. A complex mix of authority, suspicion, and something else she couldn't name. It was the longest they had held each other's gaze without the shield of a crowd or the heat of confrontation. Then, Cale waved, a small, happy wave in the direction of her window. Ronan's attention broke. He looked down at his son, said something quiet, and then, with one last, lingering glance at her window, he turned and carried the boy back toward the lodge. Mila sank onto the bed, her legs feeling weak. The encounter left her more unsettled than any direct threat could have. The hatred of the pack was simple. The cold judgment of the beta was straightforward. But this silent, complicated man was a puzzle. He was her captor, her judge, and yet he had shown her a glimpse of a soul as wounded as her own. That night, as a cold wind whispered through the aspen trees, a soft knock came at her door. It wasn't the guard with her meal. It was Yara, the alpha's sister. She held a thick woolen blanket in her arms. "The nights are getting colder," Yara said, her voice neutral but not unkind. She placed the blanket on the foot of the bed. Her eyes, a warmer brown than her brother's, scanned Mila's face. "Kyle, he asked for you at bedtime. He said you sing a song about the moon." Mila looked away, her throat tight. "It was just something silly, to help him sleep." "It worked," Yara said simply. She paused at the door. "The council meets tomorrow. My brother, he is not a man who enjoys being challenged, but he is a man who values truth. Remember that." After she left, Mila wrapped the new blanket around her shoulders. It was soft and warm, carrying the subtle, clean scent of the pack. It was a small kindness, but in the freezing silence of her fear, it felt like a fire. She was still a prisoner. Her fate was still uncertain. But as she looked out at the moon, the same moon that had watched over her in the woods, she realized the greatest danger wasn't the council's judgment. The danger was the slow, unwelcome spark of empathy she was beginning to feel for the brooding alpha, and the terrifying thought that in saving his son, she might have accidentally tethered her lonely heart to his. The morning of the council meeting dawned gray and cold, the sky a sheet of dull steel that mirrored the dread in Mila's stomach. The stern she-wolf brought her a simple tunic and pants to wear, a quiet acknowledgement that she would be facing the pack not in her exiled rags, but as someone who must be formally addressed. She was led from her cabin to the great lodge. the heart of the pack. The air inside was thick with the scent of wood smoke and old timber, and heavy with the weight of history and judgment. The room was large, with a high, beamed ceiling. In the center, a fire crackled in a massive stone hearth. Seated in a semicircle of carved chairs were the pack elders, their faces lined and severe. Beta Caleb stood to the right of the empty Alpha's chair, his arms crossed, his expression a mask of cold triumph. And then Ronan entered. He moved with a silence that commanded more attention than a shout. He did not wear ceremonial robes, only his usual dark, practical clothes, but the authority he carried was a tangible thing. He took his seat, his dark eyes scanning the room before settling on Mila, making her feel pinned in place. "This council is now in session," an ancient elder with a voice like dry leaves began. "Mila, daughter of Elias, you stand before us, an exile returned. You are accused of trespassing on pack lands and of unlawfully harboring the Alpha heir. How do you answer?" Mila's mouth was dry as dust. She forced herself to speak, her voice small but clear in the vast room. "I did not trespass. I lived where my father and I were sent. I found a lost child, and I protected him. That is all." "Protected him?" Beta Caleb scoffed, stepping forward. "Or saw an opportunity? Your father was accused of conspiring with rogues. What better way to seek revenge than by stealing the son of the Alpha who cast him out?" A murmur of agreement rippled through the elders. The old story, the easy lie, was being woven again. "My father was innocent!" Mila's defiance flared, hot and bright. "He was a loyal wolf until the day he died. He taught me to protect the weak, not use them for revenge. Kyle was a scared, hungry pup. Any wolf with a shred of decency would have done the same. And why should we believe the word of an exile over the word of your Alpha's trusted beta?" Another elder challenged. The trap was closing. It was her word against the established hierarchy, her tainted history against their ingrained prejudice. She looked at Ronan, desperate for some sign. But his face was an unreadable mask of stone. He was observing, weighing, giving nothing away. Just as despair began to choke her, a new voice, calm and clear, cut through the tension. "The child's well-being is not a matter of belief. It is a fact." All eyes turned to Yara, who had been standing quietly near the hearth. She stepped into the center of the semicircle, her gaze steady. "I have examined my nephew. For 2 weeks in the care of this exile. He gained weight. He has no new scars, no fear in his heart, only the memory of kindness. He calls her name with affection. Can the pack truly condemn someone for showing its future alpha love when he was most vulnerable?" Beta Caleb's face darkened. "Sentimentality is a weakness, Yara. It clouds judgment." "And what clouds yours, Caleb?" Yara retorted softly, her question hanging in the air like a challenge. An angry argument erupted among the elders, some siding with the beta, others hesitantly considering Yara's point. The room descended into a chaos of raised voices and old grievances. Through it all, Ronan remained silent, his eyes fixed on Mila. He watched her stand alone in the storm, her small hands clenched, her chin held high despite the terror in her eyes. He saw not a scheming exile, but a woman of profound strength, weathering an onslaught with a courage that shamed many of his seasoned warriors. Finally, he moved. It was just a slight lift of his hand, but the effect was instantaneous. The arguing ceased. The room fell silent, every wolf awaiting his word. He didn't look at the council. His dark, intense gaze was for Mila alone. "The pup is home and unharmed. That is the only truth that matters in this, he stated, his voice low and final. The old crime of her father will not be revisited today. There is no proof, only whispers. Beta Caleb looked as if he'd been struck. Ronan! Ronan's head turned, just slightly, and the look in his eyes silenced the beta completely. It was a look of absolute, unquestionable authority. He turned his attention back to Mila. But you are an exile who has touched the heart of the Alpha heir. That is a complication. You cannot return to your cabin. You will remain here, under pack watch. You will work, you will contribute, and you will be observed. Your every action will be your testimony. The council will reconvene in 1 moon's time to make a final judgment. It was not freedom. It was a probation, a sentence of scrutiny, but it was a chance. It was more than she had dared hope for. He had not declared her innocent, but he had publicly dismantled the foundation of the case against her. He had, for a moment, silenced the whispers for her. As the council disbanded in a murmur of surprise, Mila was led away. At the door, she risked a glance back. Ronan was still seated in his chair, his profile stark in the firelight. Yara was beside him, speaking to him in a low voice. He wasn't listening. He was watching Mila leave, his expression as complex and stormy as the sky outside. And for a fleeting second, their eyes met. In the depths of his dark gaze, she saw it. Not kindness, not forgiveness, but a flicker of something that was far more dangerous for her traitorous heart. A spark of respect. He had seen her fight, and he had given her a blade. Now, she had to prove she wouldn't cut him with it. The slow burn had just been fanned from a spark into a steady, smoldering flame. Her new quarters were not in the shadow of the lodge, but nestled beside it, connected by a covered walkway. It was a small, self-contained room, once meant for a visiting dignitary. It had a real bed with a thick fur blanket, a sturdy wooden desk, and a window that looked out not on a secluded grove, but on the main training grounds. It was a promotion laced with a message. You are closer to the heart of the pack, and we are watching you. The lock was gone, but the guard remained, a silent, shifting presence outside her door. Her freedom was partial, a leash that had been lengthened, not cut. The next morning, she was summoned by Yara, who handed her a bundle of rough-spun fabric and a pair of soft leather boots. You'll work in the weaving shed, Yara said, her tone pragmatic. Your hands know work. It will give the gossips something else to talk about besides your father. It was a shrewd move. The weaving shed was the domain of the pack's older women, a hub of industry and, more importantly, information. To be placed among them was a test of both her character and her fortitude. The rhythm of pack life began to seep into Mila's bones. The dawn chorus of wolves greeting the sun, the shared meals in the longhouse, the collective sigh of the community as night fell. She was still an outsider, a watched thing, but the sharp edges of their suspicion were slowly being worn down by the dull, relentless grind of daily routine. In the weaving shed, she had earned a sliver of respect. Her hands, once clumsy, now moved with a sure, quick grace. She could mend a tear so it was nearly invisible and blend dyes to match the deep forest greens and twilight blues the pack favored. The oldest weaver, a woman named Anya with hands gnarled like tree roots, had even grunted a good at a particularly complex pattern Mila had finished. It was there, late one afternoon, that the commotion started. Shouts from the training grounds, sharp and urgent, cut through the rhythmic clacking of the looms. The weavers rushed to the door, Mila among them. A young warrior was being carried toward the healing den, his leg bent at a wrong angle, blood soaking through his leather pants. His face was pale, his teeth gritted against the pain. The pack's healer, a stern man named Fenris, began barking orders. Mila watched, her nurse's instincts screaming to life. She saw the way Fenris set the bone, brutally efficient, but with no comfort, no softness. The warrior cried out, a sharp, gut-wrenching sound. Without thinking, Mila moved. She slipped into the healing den, grabbing a clean cloth and a bowl of water from a nearby table. She ignored Fenris's startled glare and knelt beside the young warrior. "Breathe," she murmured, her voice a soft counterpoint to the healer's gruffness. "Look at me. Just breathe." Her hands were gentle as she cleaned the blood from his leg. She spoke to him in a low, steady stream, not of magic or poultices, but of simple things, the strength of the pack, the meal he would enjoy later, the pride in his alpha's eyes when he recovered. She created a bubble of calm in the center of the pain. She was so focused she didn't notice the new presence that filled the doorway, blocking the light. Ronan. He stood, a silent observer, his arms crossed over his chest. He watched the exile, the weaver, tend to his warrior with a compassion he hadn't seen in a long time. He saw the way her touch soothed, the way her voice settled the young man's panicked breathing. She wasn't just cleaning a wound. She was healing the fear around it. Fenris, feeling the Alpha's gaze, straightened up. "I have it under control, Alpha. The girl is interfering." Ronan's eyes never left Mila. "Is she?" He saw the truth. He saw the skill in her hands, a skill born not of formal training, but of a deep, innate kindness. The same kindness that had saved his son. Mila, finally sensing his gaze, looked up. Her eyes, wide and green, met his. For a moment, she feared his anger, but his expression was unreadable, a deep, still pool. He didn't praise her. He didn't dismiss her. He simply watched, as if seeing her for the very first time. That evening, as Mila walked back to her room under the darkening sky, a deep voice stopped her. "Walk with me." Ronan fell into step beside her, not waiting for an answer. He led her away from the main paths, onto a trail that wound up a small hill overlooking the village. The silence between them was heavy, but not hostile. It was the silence of two people who had too many words to say and no idea how to begin. "The warrior," Ronan said finally, his voice rough in the quiet. "He will keep his leg. It will heal cleanly." "I am glad," Mila replied softly. He stopped at the crest of the hill, turning to look at her. The last light of the day caught the silver in his dark hair and the intense depth of his eyes. "That skill, the way you spoke to him, that is not something learned in exile." Mila hugged her arms against the chill. "My father taught me. He said a true pack cares for all its members, not just the strongest." It was a subtle challenge, a reference to the pack that had cast them out. She expected him to recoil. Instead, he looked out over his domain, the lanterns of the village beginning to twinkle like fallen stars below them. "A pack is only as strong as its most vulnerable member," he said, the words sounding like an old, rarely spoken belief. "My father forgot that." The admission was so quiet, so personal, it stole the air from Mila's lungs. He was sharing a piece of his own grief, his own burden of leadership. "Kyle asks for you," he continued, his gaze still fixed on the village. "Every night." Mila's heart ached. "I miss him." Ronan finally turned to face her fully. The moonlight etched the sharp planes of his face. "You may see him. Tomorrow. For a little while." It was a concession, a gift more valuable than any pardon from the council. It was a gift from a father to the woman his son loved, and in that moment, the line between alpha and man blurred beyond recognition. "Thank you," she whispered. He gave a single, curt nod. Then, he turned and walked back down the path, leaving her alone on the hilltop with the moon. With Ronan's permission hanging in the air like a sacred vow, Mila's world within the pack shifted. It was no longer just a gilded cage. It became a place where small, precious moments could bloom. True to his word, she was allowed to see Kyle. Not in grand, supervised audiences, but in quiet, ordinary ways. She would often find him playing near the weaving shed under the watchful eye of Yara or his caretaker. His face would light up, and he would run to her, babbling stories about his wooden wolves and the adventures he had with his father. She would sit with him in the sun, listening, her heart mending a little with each of his smiles. Ronan was never there, but his absence felt deliberate, a space he was intentionally creating for them. Her work, too, began to change. After the incident with the wounded warrior, Fenris, the healer, began to grudgingly tolerate her presence. He was a man of few words and saw the body as a machine to be fixed, but he could not deny her results. Mila's gentle manner drew out the true extent of an injury. A warrior would confess a deeper pain to her that he'd hidden from Fenris out of pride. She started spending her afternoons in the healing den, not by command, but by unspoken need. She cleaned wounds, prepared poultices, and most importantly, she sat with the sick and injured. She held the hand of an elderly wolf whose body was failing and sang the same moon song that had soothed Kyle. She didn't just heal bodies, she tended to spirits. It was there, tending to a young mother with a fever, that Yara found her. The alpha's sister leaned against the doorframe, watching Mila gently press a cool cloth to the woman's forehead. "You have a gift," Yara said quietly, so as not to disturb the patient. Mila looked up, surprised. "It's just what anyone would do." "No," Yara said, her tone certain. "It's not." She came closer, her voice dropping. "The pack is talking. They are not whispering about the traitor's daughter anymore. They are speaking of the gentle-handed healer, the one who saved Beta Caleb's nephew from a poisoned thorn." Mila blinked. She hadn't known the boy was related to the Beta. Caleb had said nothing, but his glares had become less frequent. "Ronan hears them," Yara added, a knowing look in her eye. "He says nothing, but he hears." That was the way of it now. Ronan was a presence felt rather than seen. His influence was in the better cuts of meat that found their way to her plate, in the new, warmer blankets on her bed, in the simple fact that no one challenged her place in the healing den anymore. He was governing her world from a distance, his care expressed not through words, but through action and quiet provision. Later that week, she was playing with Kale near the main lodge when the little boy pointed a chubby finger. "Papa's sad," he stated, with a child's blunt clarity. Mila followed his gaze. Ronan stood on the porch of the lodge, speaking with two of his scouts. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his broad shoulders, the weary set of his jaw. The weight of the pack was heavy on him. "Why is Papa sad?" she asked Kyle softly. The little boy just shrugged, then hugged his toy wolf tighter. "No song." The simple words struck her deeply. No song, no Luna, no softness in his life to balance the hardness. Just duty, memory, and solitude. As if sensing their attention, Ronan's head turned. His eyes found hers across the distance. This time, there was no cold assessment, no masked emotion. For a single, unguarded moment, she saw the raw, unvarnished truth in his dark eyes. A deep, profound loneliness that mirrored her own. Then, the mask was back. He gave her a curt, almost imperceptible nod before turning and disappearing inside the lodge. But the image was burned into her soul. The mighty Alpha, brought low not by an enemy, but by the empty space beside him. The threads that bound her to this pack were no longer just made of duty or fear. They were woven with the silken strands of a child's love, the respect of her peers, and a terrifying, blossoming understanding of the lonely king who ruled them all. She was, against all odds, rebuilding a home. The celebration for the late Luna had been beautiful, a somber yet heartwarming tapestry of shared memories. The pack had woven garlands of her favorite white flowers, told stories of her fierce kindness, and sung the old songs she had loved. For a few hours, her spirit had felt present, a gentle warmth in the firelight. But as the last embers of the bonfire died, so did the fleeting comfort. The weight of her absence settled back over the pack, and it centered squarely on their alpha. Ronan had stood through it all, a statue of stoic grief. He had held Kale's hand. He had nodded at the stories, but his eyes were distant, seeing a ghost in the flames. When it was over, he didn't linger. He turned and walked toward his lodge, his footsteps heavy. The air around him grew cold and thick, with a sadness so profound it made the nearby Omega wolves whimper softly, feeling their leader's pain in their own souls. Little Kyle, sensing the shift, had tugged on his father's hand. "Papa? Story?" Ronan had stopped. He looked down at his son, his expression softening for a fraction of a second before the shutters came down again. He knelt, his voice rough. "Not tonight, little wolf." He pressed a kiss to Kyle's forehead, a gesture so full of love and sorrow it was painful to watch. Then he stood and continued to his chambers, closing the door on the world. The next morning, the gloom hadn't lifted. Ronan was in his study, staring at a map of the territories without seeing it. The silence he emitted was a physical force, warning everyone to stay away. Yara, as always, ignored the warning. She entered without knocking, carrying 2 mugs of strong, bitter tea. She set one on the desk in front of him. He didn't acknowledge it. "They worry for you, you know," she began, her voice carefully neutral. "The pack. They see you carrying this weight alone, year after year." Ronan didn't look up. "It is my weight to carry." "Is it?" Yara challenged softly, leaning against his desk. "Or are you making it heavier than it needs to be? Kale needs a mother figure. This pack needs a Luna. You—" She paused, her voice dropping. "You need a partner. You need a woman's presence. Her touch." Ronan's head snapped up, his dark eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and raw pain. "She cannot be replaced, Yara. Do not suggest it." "I am not suggesting a replacement." Ilara's voice grew firm, her own frustration showing. "No one could ever replace Lyra. We all loved her. But she is gone, Ronan. And you are still here. Kale is still here. This pack is still here. We are drowning in your silence." She gestured toward the window, toward the living, breathing pack outside. "They see you retreat. They feel your sorrow. It becomes their own. You are the heart of this pack, and when your heart is frozen, the whole territory feels the cold." Ronan stood abruptly, turning his back to her, his shoulders rigid. "I lead them. I protect them. That is what an alpha does. That is enough." "Is it?" Yara pressed, coming to stand behind him. Is it enough for Kyle, who tries to soothe a sadness he can't understand? Is it enough for you, to live the rest of your years as a monument to your own grief? She placed a gentle hand on his arm. You deserve more than a shadow life, brother. Lyra would have been the first to tell you that. She would not want this for you, or for her son. There was a long, heavy silence. Ronan's breath was a slow, controlled rhythm in the quiet room. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and laced with a defensive, almost bewildered edge. Why are you saying this now? Are you planning to leave the pack? Yara stared at him, her mouth falling slightly open. Then she let out a short, incredulous laugh, giving him a look that was so full of sisterly exasperation it could have curdled milk. Are you serious? No, you great, brooding idiot. I am not going anywhere. This is my home. She shook her head, her expression shifting to one of profound concern. I am saying this because I am your sister, and I love you. I am saying this because I see the way you look at her. The unspoken name hung in the air between them. Mila. Ronan went utterly still. He didn't confirm or deny it. He simply stood there, the walls around his heart cracking under the twin assaults of his sister's love, and the truth he had been refusing to face. Ilara's voice was barely a whisper now. The pack sees it too, Ronan. They see the way the healer calms your son. They see the way she does not flinch from your temper. They see the way you provide for her, silently. They are waiting for you to see it yourself. She picked up her untouched tea and walked to the door, leaving him standing in the center of the room, surrounded by the ghosts of his past and the terrifying, living promise of a future he had never allowed himself to want. The hardest battles aren't fought with fangs and claws, brother, she said from the doorway. They're fought here. She tapped her own chest over her heart. And it's okay to let someone else help you fight it. She closed the door softly behind her, leaving Ronan alone with the echoing silence and the first, fragile seedling of a new thought. That moving forward wasn't a betrayal of the past, but a testament to it. The summons came as the morning mist still clung to the ground. A guard, his expression unreadable, appeared at Mila's door. The Alpha requests your presence in the Great Lodge, he said. The old nobles are assembled. A cold dread, familiar and sharp, trickled down Mila's spine. The old nobles, the same men who had served Ronan's father, who had upheld her own father's exile. Had the whispers of her healing not been enough? Had Beta Caleb's faction finally convinced Ronan to revert to the old judgment? Her hands trembled as she smoothed down her simple dress. This felt different from the last council meeting. That had been a public trial. This was a private audience, and that felt infinitely more dangerous. When she entered the Great Lodge, the atmosphere was thick with aged authority and the scent of old wood. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows. Ronan sat in his high-backed chair, his expression unreadable. Flanking him were the stern-faced old nobles, their eyes, clouded with time and tradition, fixed on her. Yara stood slightly behind her brother's chair, a calm, still presence. Mila. Ronan's voice cut through the silence, deep and steady. It wasn't a shout, but it commanded the entire room. She bowed her head. Alpha. He didn't begin with accusations. Instead, he began with history. My father, he said, his gaze drifting to the elders beside him, was a strong Alpha. He believed in the old ways, in swift justice, in the absolute authority of his word. He paused, his dark eyes returning to her. His judgments were final. He believed the actions of one could stain the bloodline of the entire family. Mila's heart sank. This was it. He was justifying what was to come. He judged your father, Ronan continued, his voice dropping, becoming more personal, almost introspective. And in doing so, he judged you. He cast a shadow over a child who had committed no crime. He leaned forward slightly, the leather of his chair creaking. I am not my father. The words hung in the air. Simple and revolutionary, the old nobles shifted uncomfortably. I am the Alpha now, the king, the judge. His voice gained strength, a low thrum of power that vibrated in Mila's bones. And I will not let you continue to suffer for a crime you did not commit, for a truth you never knew. He lifted a hand. In it was a scroll of parchment tied with a dark ribbon. The official seal of the Alpha was pressed into the wax. The exile of Mila, daughter of Elias, is hereby revoked, he declared, his voice ringing with finality. The stain on her name is washed clean. From this day forward, she is a free woman, under the full protection and rights of this pack. He stood, the full force of his presence filling the room. He walked around the desk and stopped before her. He held out the scroll. It was her pardon, her freedom. For a moment, Mila could only stare, her mind unable to process the words. The weight of a lifetime of shame and isolation began to crumble. Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. With a grace that came from a deep, resilient spirit, she gently bowed and reached out, taking the scroll from his hand. Their fingers did not touch, but the space between them crackled with the magnitude of the moment. Thank you, Alpha, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. But Ronan wasn't finished. There is more, he said, his gaze intense. Your father was not just a warrior. He was a noble of this pack. His honor, and yours, is restored. He looked at the old nobles, a silent challenge in his eyes. From this moment, you are reinstated as a noble woman of the Darkwood pack. A soft gasp came from one of the elders, but no one dared to speak against him. The Alpha had spoken. Mila clutched the scroll to her chest, the parchment feeling like both an anchor and a pair of wings. She was free. She was noble. She was home. As she lifted her head, her eyes, shining with unshed tears, met Ronan's. In their dark depths, she saw no pity, no obligation. She saw respect. She saw justice. And she saw the faint glowing ember of something more, something that made her breath catch. Over his shoulder, she saw Yara. Her sister-in-law's face was softened by a gentle, knowing smile, her eyes glistening with pride as she looked at her brother. Ronan's gaze flickered to Yara for a heartbeat, and the ghost of an understanding passed between them before he returned his attention to Mila. You are dismissed, Lady Mila, he said, his voice quiet now, for her alone. She bowed again, deeper this time, a noble acknowledging her Alpha. Then she turned and walked out of the great lodge, the eyes of the old nobles on her back. But their judgment no longer had any power over her. She stepped out into the morning sun, now bright and warm. She was no longer the exile, the weaver, or the healer. She was Mila, a noble of the pack. The world had softened for Mila. The title of noble was a strange new skin she was still growing into, but the freedom it brought was a constant, quiet song in her heart. She spent her afternoons not in the weaving shed, but in the sun-drenched central green, surrounded by other pack women. They were teaching her the intricate patterns of a traditional dance, their laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. For the first time, she wasn't an outsider looking in, but a thread being woven into the vibrant tapestry of pack life. It was into this scene of gentle normalcy that a small, joyous tornado erupted. Kyle, his little face alight with mischievous triumph, tumbled onto the green. He was giggling, a sound like falling pebbles, his escape from his nanny clearly a grand adventure. His eyes scanned the group of women, and finding the one face he sought, he made a beeline for Mila. He didn't ask for a story or demand to play. He simply burrowed into her side, pressing his warm little body against her, and popped his thumb into his mouth with a contented sigh. The women around her smiled, their expressions fond. The sight of the alpha heir seeking comfort from the redeemed exile was now a familiar, accepted picture. A moment later, the scene was punctuated by the wail of another child. A little girl with curls the color of autumn leaves had tripped over her own feet. She sat in the grass, crying big, fat tears, holding her scraped knee. "Mama!" the little girl cried, her voice a plaintive sob. A beautiful woman with the same fiery red hair rushed over, her face full of gentle concern. She scooped her daughter into her arms, rocking her and murmuring, "Shh, my love. Mama's here. It's all better now." The little girl's sobs subsided into hiccups, comforted by the simple, powerful magic of a mother's touch. Kyle, who had been watching the entire exchange with wide, unblinking eyes, slowly pulled his thumb from his mouth. A hush seemed to fall over their little corner of the green. The other women stopped their chatter, their needles stilled in their embroidery hoops. Kyle looked from the red-headed girl, safe in her mother's arms, to Mila, his little brow furrowed in deep, childish thought. The concept, once abstract, now had a name, a face, a feeling. He looked up at Mila, his dark eyes, so like his father's, filled with a sudden, profound understanding. "Mama?" he murmured, the word a soft, questioning breath. Then, with more certainty, he pressed his face against Mila's shoulder and said it louder, clearer, a declaration to the world. "Mila, ma mama!" The air left Mila's lungs. Around them, the women stared, their mouths agape in stunned, joyful silence. No one moved. No one dared to break the spell of this perfect, heartbreaking moment. Tears welled in Mila's eyes, blurring the image of the little boy in her arms. A sob caught in her throat, but it was a sob of pure, undiluted joy. She didn't correct him. She didn't hesitate. Her arms, moving on an instinct deeper than blood or bone, wrapped tightly around him. She gathered him onto her lap, cradling him as she had seen the other mother do. Kale, satisfied, rested his head against her chest and slipped his thumb back into his mouth, his little body relaxing completely in the safety of her embrace. For a long moment, the only sound was the rustle of the wind in the trees and the steady, trusting rhythm of Kale's breathing. Then, one of the older women reached out and gently patted Mila's knee, her own eyes shining. Another smiled, a slow, knowing smile that spoke of understanding and acceptance. In that word, Mama, the last of the walls around Mila's heart crumbled to dust. The exile was over. The nobility was a formality. This trust, this love, this claiming was her true homecoming. She held the Alpha's son, the little prince who had stolen her heart in the woods, and knew she was holding her own child, not by birth, but by a bond stronger than any law or legacy. The warmth of Kale's nursery was a different world from the cold stone of his study. The air smelled of soap, warm milk, and the sweet, innocent scent of a sleeping pup. A single nightlight, shaped like a crescent moon, cast a soft glow over the wooden toys and the little bed nestled in the corner. Ronan stood in the doorway for a moment, feeling like an intruder in this gentle space. He saw his son, already in his pajamas, sitting up in bed with his favorite blanket clutched to his chest. His big, dark eyes lit up. "Papa!" The word, so full of pure joy, pulled Ronan the rest of the way into the room. He sat on the edge of the small bed, the frame creaking under his weight. He felt impossibly large, too rough for this tiny, soft world. "I heard you requested a story," Ronan said, his voice softer than it had been all day. "The brave star one," Kale confirmed, snuggling down and patting the space beside him. Ronan cleared his throat. He hadn't told this story in a long time. The words felt dusty, but as he began, they returned, carried on the memory of her voice. "Once there was a little wolf who was afraid of the dark," Ronan started, his deep rumble filling the quiet room. "He thought the shadows were monsters and the wind was a giant's roar." Kyle listened, utterly rapt, his thumb hovering near his mouth. "But his mother told him," Ronan continued, the words catching slightly, "that the first star to appear at night wasn't just a star. It was the bravest star of all. It had to shine all alone in the big, dark sky to show all the other stars it was safe to come out. He told of the little wolf looking for the star, of his adventures, of his fears." But as the story wound on, Kale's attention, as it often did with toddlers, began to spiral into other territories. "And today, I saw a bug," Kale interjected, his small face serious. "A red one. It flew, like this." He wiggled his fingers in the air. "That's good," Ronan said, trying to steer back. "So, the little wolf—" "Mila gived me honey bread," Kale announced proudly. "She said no sticky on blanket, but maybe a little sticky." He showed a suspiciously clean fingertip. A small, unexpected smile touched Ronan's lips. "I'm sure she did. And Yara said my hair is messy, like a bird nest. I said no, like Papa's." Kyle reached up and patted Ronan's tousled hair with a sticky, impertinent hand. Ronan huffed a quiet laugh, a rough, unused sound. The story was completely derailed now, lost in the stream of his son's consciousness. He let it go. This was better. This was real. Kale chattered about the bug again, about his wooden wolf, about the sound the wind made. Ronan just listened, adding the occasional grunt or, "Is that so?" His large hand resting on the small mound of his son's feet under the blanket. The ramblings grew slower, the sentences connected by yawns. Kale's eyelids began to droop. He fisted his hand in Ronan's sleeve, holding on as if to keep him there. His voice became a sleepy mumble. "And Mila? She smells nice, like outside in rain. She hided me in her cloak when the big dog barked. She said, 'Shh, I got you.'" He nestled deeper into his pillow, his words slurring. She's my Mila mummy." Then, with a final soft sigh, he was asleep. The words hung in the moonlit room. Mila mummy. Ronan felt the breath freeze in his lungs. The world tilted on its axis. He stared down at his son's peaceful, sleeping face, the words echoing in the silent chambers of his heart like a bell he hadn't known was cracked. He had expected fondness, gratitude even, but this was a claim, a naming, the most sacred title in a child's world, bestowed not by biology, but by the unerring instinct of a heart that knew where it belonged. Carefully, so as not to wake him, Ronan bent and pressed a kiss to Kyle's forehead. "Sleep well, little wolf," he whispered. Your brave star is shining." He sat there in the quiet dark, long after Kyle's breathing had deepened into the rhythms of dreams. The scrolls and the disputes of the pack were 1,000,000 miles away. All that existed was the truth spoken in a child's sleepy voice, a truth that had just reshaped the walls of his world, leaving a space wide open, waiting to be filled. The morning after the story, the air in the lodge felt charged, as if a storm had passed through and left the pressure unsettled. Mila was in the sunlit kitchen, helping to prepare the morning meal. Her hands were steady as she sliced apples, but her mind was in the nursery, hearing the echo of a child's sleepy voice. "Mila, mummy." The words were a secret sun, warming her from the inside out. She didn't hear him approach. One moment, she was alone at the long wooden table. The next, his presence filled the doorway, blocking the light. "You." The single word was a low growl, vibrating with a tension that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She turned, the knife still in her hand. Ronan looked unhinged. The careful control he always wore was gone. His eyes were dark pits of stormy emotion. His jaw clenched so tight, a muscle ticked. He'd clearly not slept. "Alpha?" she asked, setting the knife down slowly. "What did you do?" he demanded, stepping into the room. The space shrank around him. "What did you say to him?" "To Kale?" Confusion knit her brow. "I said good night. I told him his father was coming." "Do not play innocent with me." The command cracked through the kitchen like a whip. He advanced, stopping only when the table was between them. "He called you mummy, a word he has never said. What game are you playing, weaving your way into my house, into his head?" The accusation was a physical blow. The warmth inside her froze and shattered. "A game?" Her voice trembled, not with fear, but with a rising, furious hurt. "You think my care for him is a game? You think I taught him that word? You must have!" he roared, his fist coming down on the table, making the wooden bowls jump. "You filled the space. You made him need you. You're trying to... To what, Ronan?" she shouted back, her own temper finally, gloriously, snapping. She rounded the table, getting right into the space he had invaded. "To give him the comfort he cries for at night? To be the person he runs to when he's scared? What a monstrous plot!" Her use of his name, bare and unadorned, seemed to inflame him further. He loomed over her, his heat and anger radiating against her skin. "You overstep. You are a noble of my pack, not his mother." "I am whatever he says I am," she fired back, her chest heaving. "Because I am there. Where were you last night? Buried in scrolls? Where are you every time he looks for a parent's smile?" "Lost in your own shadows." She saw the words land, saw the raw, gouging pain they inflicted. She knew it was cruel, but she was past caring. He had taken the most beautiful feeling of her life and called it a trick. His hand shot out, not to strike her, but to grip her upper arm. It wasn't painful, but it was absolute, an anchor in the tempest of their anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snarled, his face inches from hers. "I know he needs a father who is present," she hissed, trying to pull away, but his grip was iron. "And I know I will never ever apologize for being the one who is." Something in him broke. The anger twisted, morphing into something darker, hotter, more desperate. The look in his eyes shifted from fury to a blazing, unbearable intensity. He was looking at her mouth, at the words that had wounded him, at the woman who dared to stand her ground. "You will hold your tongue," he whispered, the threat of velvet promise. "Or what?" she challenged, breathless. He answered her with a searing, brutal kiss. It was not gentle. It was not loving. It was a collision, a punishment and a claiming, a furious attempt to silence her and consume her all at once. His lips were hard and demanding against hers, his grip on her arm tightening, pulling her flush against the solid, unyielding wall of his body. Mila gasped against his mouth, and for a second she froze. Then, a firestorm of her own answered. Her hands came up, not to push him away, but to fist in the front of his tunic, holding on as the world dissolved into heat and anger and a shocking, undeniable hunger. She kissed him back with equal ferocity. A battle of wills fought with lips and teeth and shared ragged breath. It was hate. It was passion. It was years of loneliness and grief and unspoken need exploding between them. He walked her back until her shoulders hit the cold stone wall of the pantry, his body pinning hers. One hand released her arm to cup the back of her head, angling her for a deeper, more devastating kiss. A low, animal sound rumbled from his chest into hers. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, losing herself in the storm. It was the sound of a pot clattering in the main hall that shattered the moment. They broke apart as if scalded, both breathing heavily. Her lips were swollen, her mind reeling. His eyes were wild, dark with shock and a lingering savage fire. He stared at her, at the evidence of his loss of control written on her mouth, in her wide, stunned eyes. Horror, self-loathing, and that unquenched heat warred on his face. He took a staggering step back, then another, as if she were a live flame. Without a word, without a single glance back, he turned and strode from the kitchen, leaving her slumped against the wall with a hammering heart. Ronan found his sister in the herb garden behind the healing den. She was kneeling in the soil, her hands dark with earth, carefully separating sage seedlings. The calm, mundane sight of her was a stark contrast to the tempest still raging inside him. He stood there for a long moment, a shadow on the sunlit path, the ghost of Mila's taste still on his lips, the echo of his son's words a drumbeat in his skull. Yara. She looked up, wiping a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. Her smile faded as she saw his face. He knew he looked like a man who had stared into an abyss and found it staring back. "Brother, you look like you fought a war." "I have," he muttered, his voice gravelly. He paced a few steps, the rigid control he'd forced onto himself after leaving the kitchen barely holding. "It is about Kyle." Yara sat back on her heels, giving him her full attention. "Is he unwell?" "No, he is perceptive." Ronan stopped, staring at a fixed point on the garden wall. The words felt like shards of glass in his throat. "Last night, when I put him to bed, he called her Mummy. He said, 'Mila, Mummy.'" The confession hung in the quiet air, heavier than any battle report. He dared a glance at his sister. Yara didn't gasp. She didn't smile. Her expression grew still and deeply thoughtful. She looked down at the fragile seedling in her hand, her thumb brushing a tender leaf. The silence stretched, filled only with the buzz of bees. "I see," she said finally, her voice soft as the breeze. "See what?" Ronan demanded, the frustration boiling over. "He doesn't understand what he's saying. It's confusion. Gratitude. She's been kind to him, and he's a child. He knows exactly what he's saying, Ronan," Yara interrupted, her tone leaving no room for argument. She looked up, her eyes clear and certain. A child's heart does not deal in titles or politics. It knows safety. It knows love. It knows Mummy is the source of those things. She stood, brushing the dirt from her knees. He has found that source in her. Ronan shook his head, a stubborn, reflexive denial. It is not that simple. Lyra would be weeping with joy, Yara finished for him, her voice firm yet compassionate. She would be on her knees thanking the moon goddess that her son, in her absence, found a heart so capable of loving him, that her husband found a woman strong enough to stand up to him and gentle enough to soothe his child. Her words disarmed him, striking straight at the root of his unspoken guilt. The tension in his shoulders tightened another notch. This changes nothing, he insisted, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. It changes everything, Yara corrected gently. She took a step toward him, her gaze unwavering. Don't you understand? The hardest part is already over. The one whose opinion matters most has already decided. He has chosen his mother. She let that sink in, her next words dropping like a stone into still water. The choice is not yours to make, brother. It never really was. Kale has made it. All that's left is for you to make it official. Ronan stared at her as if she had just driven a knife into his chest. The betrayal in his eyes was raw and profound. His sister, his ally. Now speaking as if she were on her side, as if this were some inevitable tide he was foolishly trying to hold back. You speak of this as if it is a treaty to be signed, he growled, the sound rumbling from deep within. As if my son's heart is a bargaining chip. I speak of it as a healing, Yara said, her own frustration showing. The pack sees it. I see it. You are the only one still fighting a war that ended the day she carried your bleeding son out of the woods. You are so busy defending a ghost. You are forsaking the living. She reached out and placed a dirt-smudged hand on his clenched fist. Her touch was grounding. The official part, that is just words before the pack. The real vow was made when a little boy looked at the woman who saved him and saw his whole world. All you have to do is be brave enough to see it too. She gave his fist a gentle squeeze, then turned and walked back to her seedlings, leaving him alone in the sun-dappled path. Ronan stood, rooted to the spot, her words echoing. He has made his choice. All that's left is for you to make it official. The betrayal he felt slowly bled away, leaving behind a vast, terrifying emptiness. An emptiness that, for the first time, was not filled with grief, but with a staggering possibility. He looked toward the lodge, and for a fleeting second, he wasn't the alpha weighing a political union. He was just a man standing in the garden, being asked to catch up to the future his son had already run toward with open arms. 2 weeks. 14 days of a silence that was neither cold nor hostile, but thick with the unsaid. The memory of the kiss lived in the space between them, a shared secret fire that had rewired the air in every room they both occupied. Mila moved through her days with a new, quiet awareness, her body remembering the press of him against the wall, her heart still stung by the anger that had sparked it. When the summons came again, it was not to the public hall, but to his private study. Her heart did a frantic dance against her ribs. This time, the desk was clear. The scrolls had been put away. Ronan stood before the fireplace, his back to her as she entered, his posture not of a king holding court, but of a man steeling himself. The evening light through the window gilded the edges of his form. Mila, he said, turning. His face was calm, the storm she'd seen in the kitchen banked to embers, but his eyes held a gravity that made her breath catch. "Alpha," she replied, stopping a respectful distance away. "Sit, please." He gestured to the chair before the hearth. He did not retreat behind his desk. He took the chair opposite hers, the low fire painting his features in warm, shifting light. The intimacy of the setting was deliberate, unnerving. "For 2 weeks," he began, his voice low and measured, "I have pondered the future of this pack, of my son, of myself." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his large hands clasped. He was not looking at the Alpha's seal or out the window at his lands. He was looking directly at her. "The law is clear. The pack needs stability. Kyle needs a mother." He paused, the words hanging there. This was the political reasoning, the cold logic she had expected. A part of her braced for the blow. "But the law is not why I called you here," he continued, as if reading the slight stiffening of her shoulders. "And while the pack's need is real, it is not my primary reason either." He took a deep breath, the first crack in his calm facade showing. "My son has a wisdom I lack. He sees the heart of things. He has made a choice, a pure, unwavering choice that shames my own hesitation." Ronan's dark eyes held hers, and in their depths, she saw not just duty, but a painful, hard-won honesty. "He chose you, not as a caretaker, but as his mother. That is a title not given lightly, and one I cannot, in good conscience, ignore." "I am asking you, Mila," he said, his voice dropping to a rough whisper that vibrated through her, "to make his choice official, to stand as his mother before the pack, to become our Luna." The word hung in the firelit space, immense and beautiful and terrifying. He was asking her, not commanding, not decreeing. Mila's mind spun. This was everything she had secretly longed for and never allowed herself to want. It was a political arrangement built on a child's love, proposed by a man who had kissed her with a desperation that still haunted her dreams. "I understand that you are doing this for him," Mila replied, her voice gaining strength. "And I will do it for him, gladly, with my whole heart." It was her first acceptance, and it was for Kale. He nodded slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing a fraction. "The ceremony will be at the next full moon. Until then." He stood, the movement bringing him closer to her chair. The heat between them spiked, the memory of the pantry wall at her back suddenly vivid. "We will need to discuss the particulars, the duties, the expectations." The way he said expectations was laden with a meaning that had nothing to do with pack protocols. Mila rose to face him. They were close now, closer than they had been since the kiss. She could see the silver in the stubble along his jaw, the fierce, conflicted longing in his eyes. "I understand, Alpha," she whispered. "Ronan?" He corrected her, his voice a low growl. "When we are alone, it is Ronan." Her name for him, spoken back to her as a gift, a threshold crossed. "Ronan," she breathed, testing the weight of it. A muscle jumped in his jaw. The air crackled. The official question had been asked and answered, but the personal one, the one about the kiss, the heat, the future that was now rushing toward them, remained, a delicious, terrifying tension waiting to be resolved. "We will talk more tomorrow," he said, his gaze dropping to her lips for a searing instant before he stepped back, breaking the spell. "Leave me now." It was a dismissal, but it felt like a reprieve, a chance to breathe before the next inevitable collision. Mila bowed her head, a new, formal deference in the gesture, and turned to leave. As she closed the study door behind her, She knew nothing would ever be simple again. The next day, Mila stood once more outside the study door. This time, her knock was firmer. This time, she was not a petitioner, but a woman stepping toward a destiny. "Enter." His voice was like gravel. She pushed the door open to find him standing by the window, the morning light outlining his powerful frame. He turned, and the air in the room immediately condensed. "You came," he said, as if he'd half expected her to flee. "We have duties to discuss," she replied, her voice surprisingly steady. She walked to the center of the room, stopping before the massive oak desk. "Alpha." He moved then, a slow, predatory pace that brought him around to the other side of the desk. He didn't sit. He braced his hands on the polished wood, leaning forward. "The duties, yes. Aluna must know the pack's holdings, their disputes. She must sit in judgment at my side. She must inspire loyalty and, well, instill stability." The last duty dropped into the silence, heavy and intimate. Her eyes flew to his. He wasn't looking at her with political calculation. He was watching her, his dark gaze heated, tracing the flush that rose on her neck. "I know the basics of the first," she said, holding her ground. "The second, I will learn. The third—" She took a breath, her own boldness rising to meet his challenge. "I will also learn, El." A spark, fierce and approving, flashed in his eyes. A low sound, almost a growl, vibrated in his chest. "Come here." It was not a request. It was a command that pulled at something primal deep within her. She didn't hesitate. She walked around the desk until she stood directly before him, the solid wood at her back, his powerful body caging her in. "The first duty of Aluna," he murmured, his voice a rough caress as his eyes devoured her face, "is to her Alpha." His hand came up, but he didn't touch her. He hovered, his fingertips a breath away from her cheek. To challenge him, to strengthen him, to soothe him. "And how?" Mila whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Does my Alpha wish to be soothed?" The last vestige of his control snapped. With a groan that was pure surrender, he closed the distance. His mouth captured hers in a kiss that was nothing like the angry clash in the kitchen. This was deliberate. This was deep, searching, and devastatingly hot. It was a claiming yes, but also an answer. It was the silent, searing acceptance of all the unspoken things that had simmered for weeks. Mila met him with equal fervor, her hands coming up to tangle in the dark silk of his hair, pulling him closer. The taste of him, spice and storm and Ronin, unraveled her. The world narrowed to the hard plane of his chest against hers, the demanding pressure of his lips, the rough wood of the desk digging into her back. He broke the kiss, his breathing ragged, and trailed his mouth down the column of her throat, nipping at the sensitive skin where her pulse raced. "This," he breathed against her skin, his hands moving from her waist to grip her hips. "This is how." In one swift, powerful motion, he lifted her, seating her on the edge of the massive desk. Scrolls and ledgers scattered, forgotten. He stepped between her legs, his body aligning with hers, and kissed her again, deeper, hungrier. "Ronan." His name was a plea and a permission. The sound of booted footsteps approaching down the hall, too loud, too close, sliced through the haze of desire. They froze, lips a breath apart, bodies thrumming with interrupted need. Ronan's eyes opened, dark pools of fire and frustration. The footsteps paused outside the door, then thankfully retreated. The spell was broken, but the heat remained, a tangible force between them. Slowly, trembling, Ronan pulled back. His hand gently, reluctantly, smoothed her dress back down over her thigh. He rested his forehead against hers, their ragged breaths mingling. "The duties?" he said, his voice raw with unsated desire. "Can wait." He helped her down from the desk, his hands lingering on her waist as she found her footing. She was gloriously disheveled, her lips swollen, her eyes dazed. He looked the same, a king undone. "Tomorrow," he stated, the word a vow. "We continue the discussion." He didn't kiss her again. He didn't need to. The promise was etched in the air, in the scattered scrolls on his desk, in the frantic beating of her heart. The path to becoming Luna was no longer a political formality. It was a white-hot journey. And they had just taken the first searing step together. The great clearing at the heart of the Packlands had been transformed. Torches burned in a wide circle, pushing back the twilight and painting everything in warm, dancing light. Long tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, honeyed breads, and barrels of spiced cider. The entire pack was there, a sea of expectant faces, their laughter and chatter filling the cool evening air. A feast of this scale, announced with such secrecy, could only mean one thing: a major declaration from their alpha. Mila stood at the edge of the torchlight, her heart a frantic bird in her chest. She wore a gorgeous gown of deep forest green, one of the finer ones Yara had helped her secure. She felt every pair of eyes that slid her way, heard the whispers that her name sparked. Kyle, scrubbed clean and proud in a little tunic, held her hand tightly, sensing the importance of the night. A hush fell as Ronan emerged from the lodge. He was not dressed in warrior's leathers, but in a formal tunic of midnight blue, a silver clasp at his shoulder shaped like a howling wolf. He looked every inch the Alpha King, his face a mask of solemn authority as he moved to the raised platform at the head of the clearing. He did not smile. He simply stood, and the silence became complete, broken only by the crackle of the torches. "Pack of the Dark Wood!" His voice rang out, deep and clear, carrying to the very back of the gathering. "You have come here tonight in celebration, yet you do not know what we celebrate." He paused, his gaze sweeping over his people, letting the suspense build. "For many years, this pack has been strong, but it has carried a shadow of loss, of an empty space where a heart should beat." He looked down, and for a moment, the mask slipped, revealing the man beneath. "We remember tonight, as we always must, my late Luna, Lyra, the mother of my son. Her courage, her light, her sacrifice in bringing my son into this world." He placed a hand over his heart. That loss carved a hollow in this pack that has never fully healed. The pack murmured, a sound of shared grief and respect. Many bowed their heads. "A pack cannot thrive with a hollow heart," Ronan continued, his voice gaining strength. "And an alpha cannot lead from a place of emptiness. For weeks, I have pondered how to mend this. The answer did not come from strategy or treaties or politics." He lifted his head, and his eyes found Mila in the crowd. A direct, unwavering line of sight that felt like a physical touch. It came from the purest soul among us, my son, Kyle. All eyes shifted to the little boy clinging to Mila's hand. Kyle looked up at his father, his small face serious. In his wisdom, a child sees truth. He finds love where adults see complication. He finds a mother not only in memory, but in the living heart of one who has shown him nothing but protection, kindness, and unwavering strength. Ronan's voice softened just for a moment as he looked at his son. He has made his choice, and I respect it. Then his gaze burned back to Mila, full of fierce conviction. I have made my choice as well. He extended a hand toward her. Every soul in the clearing held its breath. Mila, daughter of a wronged noble, healer of our sick, protector of my heir, and the woman who has reminded this alpha what it is to live and not just to rule. His words were a public vow, stripping them both bare. Step forward. Her legs felt like water, but Kale's small hand in hers was an anchor. She walked through the parted crowd, the child at her side, until she stood at the base of the platform, looking up at him. The choice is made, Ronan declared, his voice booming once more for all to hear. By the law of our people, and by the will of your alpha and his heir, I declare Mila to be my Luna, the mother of my son, my partner in leading this pack into a new dawn. A shockwave of sound rippled through the pack, gasps, cheers, murmurs of surprise. Yara, standing to the side, had tears streaming down her smiling face. Ronan stepped down from the platform until he was level with her. He took her hand from Kyle's grip, his touch firm and warm. Do you accept this? Not just the title, but the pup and the man who comes with him? In the roaring of her own blood, Mila heard only his question. She saw the ghost of their first kiss in his eyes, the heat of their interrupted moment on his desk, the future they had barely dared to imagine. She saw the little boy who had called her Mummy. I accept, she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent pack. The title, the pup, and the man, all of it. A triumphant roar erupted from the pack, but Ronan heard only her. He pulled her to him, one hand cradling the back of her head, and kissed her. It was not the angry kiss of the kitchen, nor the desperate, hungry kiss of the study. This was a seal, a public, powerful, and deeply tender claiming that held the promise of everything to come. The pack's cheers reached a fever pitch around them. When they broke apart, Kale was tugging on both their clothes, laughing. Ronan swept his son up into one arm and put the other around Mila's waist, holding his new family before the pack. You will respect her, he commanded, his joy giving way to the steel of the alpha for a final decree. You will honor her, as I do, as my son does. She is your Luna. Our heart is whole again. As the celebration swelled around them, music beginning to play, Ronan looked at Mila, his dark eyes shining with a light she had never seen in them before. It was the end of the long, cold shadow. It was the beginning of everything. 4 years. The words felt too small to hold the reality. 4 years of sunrises over the Darkwood pack, of seasons turning, of a quiet, sturdy love building a life from the ashes of 2 broken pasts. Yara had found her mate, a steady-eyed tracker from the northern ridge, and moved to build a new life with him. Her absence was felt deeply, a change in the pack's rhythm. The weight of the Luna's duties, mediating disputes, planning harvest feasts, soothing anxieties, and managing the endless needs of a thriving pack, settled fully onto Mila's shoulders. But she carried it not as a burden, but as a purpose, her grace and firm compassion weaving a new kind of strength into the pack's fabric. And she carried another weight, a joyous, demanding one. The rounding curve of her stomach, heavy with new life. Ronan watched her navigate it all with a constant simmering awe. His grumpiness was now a well-worn cloak he wore for the world, a familiar armor against the petty grievances of leadership. but it fell away the moment he crossed the threshold of their private chambers. There he would find her, often with her feet up, a hand resting on the swell of their child, her other hand often buried in the fur of a now larger Kale, who was listening intently to a story. Ronan's only greeting was a deep, wordless sigh as he would sink beside her, his head coming to rest in her lap, or his large, calloused hand settling over hers on her belly, feeling the kicks of their impatient pup. Kale, at 7, was a whirlwind of earnest curiosity and fierce loyalty. He was his father's shadow in the training yards, but his mother's boy in the healing den and kitchens. He was protective of Mila with a seriousness that made Ronan's chest tighten with pride. He was still her little boy, still climbing into her lap for cuddles, though his long legs now dangled nearly to the floor. The labor began at dawn, on a day that had promised nothing but autumn chill. A sharp, unmistakable pain, then a slow, steady tide tightening around her. She was in the middle of resolving a dispute between two young warriors over hunting grounds. She simply paused, placed a hand on her belly, took a deep breath, and said, "We will continue this tomorrow. For now, the South Ridge goes to Karen. My final word as your Luna. Now, if you'll excuse me." She walked, calm and deliberate, to find Ronan, leaving the two young wolves staring after her in stunned silence. Ronan's control, so absolute in every other aspect of his life, shattered the moment he saw the focused, serene look on her face. Panic, raw and primal, flashed in his eyes. He was a storm of barked orders, for the midwife, for hot water, for Yara to be summoned. He was a statue of terrified tension outside their chamber door, flinching at every muted sound from within. Hours later, a new, stronger cry joined the chorus of the pack. A fierce, indignant wail that spoke of lungs ready to howl at the moon. When Ronan was finally allowed in, he looked like a man who had fought 10 battles. He went to Mila first, kissing her sweaty forehead, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "My brave, brave Luna," he choked out, his voice rough. Then he looked at the tiny bundle in her arms, swaddled in soft gray wool. The baby had settled, her face a perfect, serene miniature of Ronan's, the same strong brow, the same elegant slope of the nose. But when she opened her eyes, blinking in the soft light, they were Mila's, a piercing, clear green, like new leaves after rain. It was the most beautiful collision of their souls he had ever seen. "A daughter," Mila whispered, exhausted and radiant. Ronan could only nod, his throat too tight for words. He touched one impossibly small, starfish hand, and her tiny fingers curled instinctively around his rough thumb, claiming him completely. Later, when Mila and the baby were clean and resting in a nest of fresh linens, Kyle was brought in. He approached with a solemnity beyond his years, his steps quiet. He looked at his mother, then at the tiny being in her arms. "This is your sister," Mila said softly. Kyle climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed. He didn't try to hold her. He simply leaned over and, with a tenderness that stole the air from the room, stroked one finger down the baby's velvety cheek. The baby sighed in her sleep. A smile broke across Kyle's face. It was a rare, beautiful, unfiltered smile, the one he reserved for his mother's best stories and his father's proudest nods. It was Ronan's smile, the one that transformed the alpha's stern face into something bright and warm. He looked up at his parents, his dark eyes, his mother's gift. "She's so beautiful," he declared. And in that moment, surrounded by the scent of her new pup, the solid warmth of her mate's hand on her shoulder, and the loving gaze of her firstborn son. Mila knew this was the heart of it all. This was the raw, real, heartwarming story. Not just hers and Ronan's, but Kale's, and now this tiny, green-eyed girl's. A story of a pack, of a family, forged in exile and fire, and now blooming, wild and beautiful and everlasting, in the deep woods they called home. Author's note: family isn't always blood. A mother isn't always the one who gave birth. Sometimes, it's the one who found you lost, the one who chose to stay, the one whose love became your shelter. You can build a home in the ruins. You can be the peace you never had. Did this story find a piece of you? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support keeps me going.